Now these two men here are two of the most stubborn men on the planet, or should I say were. Only one of them, of course, is now alive, Steve Jobs having gone. But Steve Jobs was well known for refusing the advice of any expert, and in fact sometimes going dead against it. Bill Gates is well known for not taking anybody's advice except his own. In fact, Bill Gates is one of the most blinkered people on the planet. So when you've got stubborn people like these, how on earth do you get them to do anything? Well, there's fewer things that are more frustrating than trying to argue with a closed-minded person. However, there are some psychological tactics that you can use that will get anyone to listen to what you have to say objectively and fairly. This is not to say you're going to use mind control or hypnosis to change their mind for them. No. This is just a way of getting around their own inherent psychology. Now usually there's 4 different types of resistance to whatever it is you're saying. And one is that this person is frightened of things that are new, doesn't like change, usually says no to anything, no matter what the idea is. If it's new, it's scary, and he doesn't like that. And his motto is change is bad. So that's one type of person. Then you've got a person who has a problem with some people. In this case it would be you. And you find that no matter how persuasive, no matter how much your idea is actually logical and sensible, if he hears it from you, he just doesn't want to know. Then you have the person who just come through another totally unrelated situation where he felt he was trampled all over, manipulated, and those wounds are still fresh, so anything that further deviates from his usual thinking is simply not well received, and he's not feeling good about his ability to make decisions, and he will simply avoid making decisions. And those 3 you can kind of lump together because the same tactic works for all of them. So really you've got to look for the 4th type of person to know whether to do something different. And this is a person who has what is called in psychology a situational aversion. This means it's got nothing to do with you, but the whole idea of whatever it is just doesn't sit well with him. A bit like trying to convince a Muslim to eat a pork shoulder. And it means that it's just not him. Your idea is inconsistent with how he sees himself, his concept of himself, and this is quite a big problem because human beings very rarely go with something that defeats their self-image. So, I was saying that the first 3 types of people, the technique is the same, and so it is. It's a 2-phase thing. Now you need to plan, because planning is the key to getting these sorts of people to actually change their mind. And the first thing to do is to get that person to make a statement that's consistent, not actually granting your request or whatever, or going along with whatever it is you're going to suggest. Just make a statement. You have to get him or her to agree to an idea or way of thinking that will later neutralize their own objection. And it doesn't matter what the person's attitude is, you can adjust their thinking quite quickly with just this one tactic. So let's say that you want your boss to listen to something new that you've got to say, and they never do listen to you. You might say something like, well, don't you think that closed-mindedness is such an undesirable trait? And they'll agree. And then a short time later, when you bring up the subject, you'll find them unusually open to your suggestions, because once your boss has agreed with that statement, she's unconsciously driven to act in a consistent manner. And there's lots of other ways that you can do it. Let's say you want someone to go out with you to a restaurant and you know they're just going to say no. What you do is you pick that restaurant, and an hour, maybe 2 hours beforehand, you'll talk to them about it and you say, "Look, I heard about this great new restaurant. It's fantastic. Can you describe it?" And you say, "It's brilliant. I mean, I'd love to go there, wouldn't you?" And they will agree. Note, you haven't actually asked them out. You've just mentioned the place that you want to take them. And then an hour later, when you take them, when you ask them, it will be very, very difficult for them to say no. And this tactic is so effective because human beings have a strong need to be congruous with their attitudes, beliefs and actions. So if someone thinks one way and does something else, he's thought of as nutty. And we perceive ourselves in the same way. Once we commit publicly to a particular stance, our attitude unconsciously will automatically conform to it. Now, the next thing is you have to restrict in some way or in some part his or her ability to do what they don't want to do. Not make it easy for them to take your course, make it difficult. Now, you've heard of the whole devil's advocate thing. Well, this is a kind of devil's advocate technique. You present that course of action, then you come up with which they've already agreed to in the last phase, and you then come up with all the reasons why they shouldn't do it. And when someone is stubborn, it's because he knows he can do something, but he chooses not to. But by thwarting his ability to actually take that action, then the equation in his head is now thrown off, because he no longer sees the decision as his. And if you can't do something, you have no reason to be stubborn about it. As a matter of fact, psychologists will tell you that it increases the desire to do it. And it's like telling someone who doesn't like to travel that they can never leave their own hometown. And suddenly, with the freedom restricted, the ego goes into overdrive and creates a subconscious desire to be able to leave. Then once the desire to be able to leave kicked in, it's followed with the desire to leave. And the thinking is that I want to be able to leave because I must want to leave. And the mind then begins to race for ways to do what it feels it must want to do. And this restriction can take any form, and it's used a lot in sales. This is why sales have expiration dates, and they're for a limited time only. If the auction's always open, our impetus to act is not so strong. But once something becomes restricted, whether or not we really wanted it in the first place, we become more interested in it. But here's the key. You mustn't overcome that restriction. The restriction must be something that is overcome when the person comes up with the solution. For example, taking our previous example where you wanted to take someone on a date to a particular restaurant, you say, "Of course, you're so busy you won't be able to go at all. I'm going to have a really good time. Anyway, if you change your mind, just ring." And they'll be thinking, "Well, hang on a minute, I haven't changed my mind yet." They won't just let you go. You might think that they will, but they won't. And even if they let you go at the time, their mind is going to work away on, "Well, I'd really like to go to that restaurant. But I can't because I'm so busy. Oh, hang on a minute, next Thursday." And then they'll ring you up. They'll ring you up, which you might think is crazy. But this is the benefit of using psychology to do these things. So, it's really a question of planning. You need to plan what statements you're going to make so that they're relevant and that they're consistent. So here's some more tips. When a person becomes absolutely adamant about their position, they're not going to change, okay? Well, you need to take advantage of something, and that is their physiology. A person's emotional state is directly related to his physical state. If he's locked into some position of denial or refusal, I'm not going to do that, whatever happens, get him to move his body, preferably to somewhere else. For example, if you're inside a building, then change to a different room. Get someone to call you and say, oh, sorry, this meeting room's required, we're going to have to move to a different room, sorry about that. And when you move them from one place to another, this has a psychological effect, and it prevents what is called mind lock and makes it easier for him to change his psychological position. Even if you have to stay in the room, if he's sitting down, have him get up and try to walk around the room. For example, point at something that he can't see on a notice board and get him to come up and read it. And this takes advantage and nullifies the fact that when your body is in a fixed position, your mind can become similarly frozen. Now, if you're asking someone to reconsider because they've already refused, give additional information, which this means, once again, it means planning. And you have to actually hold back this information, because you need an excuse. This person will need an excuse to change their mind, and that excuse can be the additional information you give them. If you don't give them information, you're just arguing against something that you've already talked about. So by doing this, they can make a new decision based on additional information instead of simply changing his mind. And it's very important that you don't actually get him to change his mind for no reason, because people are very reluctant to do that. Now, there's another old trick that's often used by salesmen. If you can find a large mirror in the room and have the conversation near that, then having a conversation by a mirrored wall or reflective panel increases the chance that they will comply. It's unbelievable, but it works. And finally, studies have all concluded that when a person holds an opposing view, you should adopt a two-sided argument. So you've got to assume that they've based their opinion on fact, they're not just insane. So a one-sided argument will appear to him as if you're not taking his thinking into consideration. So if you present his side first and you say something like, well, I know you're not going to like this because blah 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 blah, but, and then present yours, you will find them much more likely to comply. And the final thing I want to say, the absolute king, and this does require some real planning, this requires that you talk about the situation in vague terms once or twice, maybe a day or two beforehand, and you give them time to forget the exact nuts and bolts of what was said. And the way you do it is to let them think that they are responsible for the idea. You say, oh, do you remember 2 or 3 days ago we talked about such and such a thing? Well, I was thinking about that idea you had. And they say, what idea is that? Oh, the one about such and such. And it's really essential then you get them to say yes, that they had the idea. And I think it's a much better idea than you thought it was, because blah blah blah. And using that technique, you can actually get the fourth type of person, which is the most difficult person to persuade. That is to say, the person who has a situational aversion, who hates the whole idea, and they think, what if it was my idea? Why am I so opposed to it? And other ways of getting this type of person to agree is that you actually have to change the idea. You have to introduce a what if. You know? You have to introduce a what if. Let's say you want him to do something outrageous, like kill a family member. You have to use a what if, scenario, like, what if your uncle Fred was a crazed axeman running at you with an axe? You'd kill him then, wouldn't you? That's possibly not a very good example. It's rather an extreme example, but it does illustrate the type of argument that you would use. Now, before you put these techniques into practice, you need to have a look and tell whether someone is actually willing to do it. Now, you can actually talk to someone and open their closed mind to see what they're really thinking, because sometimes people put up a strong front because they know they'll crumble if they ever have to defend their position, and things will go a lot easier if you can actually find out whether they're that sort of person first. And there's an old saying that the easiest people to sell to are people who have signs saying no salesman or solicitors, and the reason behind that is that these people know deep down that if a salesman did get to them, they would buy whatever the hell he had to sell. So this is how you do it. And here's a for instance. You tell someone to write down on a piece of paper a number from 1 to 25, and if you can guess what it is, then they have to agree to do such and such, whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. Now, they will probably agree because they believe there is little chance that you can guess right. If they don't agree to that at all, then it's very likely that they're going to be very difficult to persuade, and you're going to have to use all these techniques. And the strategy here is in not being right, it's in agreeing, get them to agree to take the chance. If they absolutely refuse, then there's no way that they're likely to comply with whatever your request or position is. If, however, they do agree, you have already actually managed to adjust slightly their belief system, and that's all you need. You've taken her already from a no to a maybe, and now over the next few hours or days they will have to adjust their belief system to allow the possibility for the action you want to happen, and they will actually become more open. So there we go. So here's your strategy from start to beginning. Begin by testing them to determine just how closed-minded they really are. Something like, if I can pick the winner in the 2:30 at Ascot, would you actually do this thing? And the next thing to do is, because human beings have a strong need for consistency, have him or her agree to a similar idea or a way of thinking that will negate their own objections later. Next, restrict in some way their ability to do what you want them to do, and give them the opportunity to provide a solution. Now, this restriction could be entirely fictional, or it could be a valid one, but one you know that they can overcome. Don't, for God's sake, give them something that you know that they will never ever be able to overcome. And the next thing to do is, when they start to object, change their physiology, move them to somewhere else, get them to walk across the room, whatever. And the next thing to do is, when they start to object, Give them new information, because without it, if their mind is changed, they will think themselves inconsistent. And the next thing is to let them know that you've recently been influenced by their ideas, and if possible, that the whole thing was their idea in the first place, if you've had conversations along this before. Adopt a two-sided argument to increase your credibility. If possible, show them how they are responsible for the idea in the first place, and if the idea goes completely against their value system, see if there's some way that you can change the parameters of the request, making the behaviour more acceptable to them. Now, using these techniques, you could get even Steve Jobs or Bill Gates to change their mind about something, or to take some advice, and you'll be absolutely amazed how well these psychological techniques work. Well, if you found this useful, or you've enjoyed this presentation, then please like, share and subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks very much.
Oh, hi, Arduinotronic. For gold news, finances, opinions, art, and just loads of interesting crap. Alright?